It's the 20th of October and it's time for the 20th film in my 31 Horrors of Mike. This is a film that was actually requested just yesterday by Utrinque23. I apologise if I mispronounced your username, but thanks very much for the request. And when you mentioned this movie, I thought, yeah, that's actually a really good shout. So I've kicked one film out and I brought this one in. Don't worry about that other film, don't feel bad for it. I will do a review of it at some point. But the film that we're talking about is the 2004 remake of Dawn of the Dead. I normally don't like remakes. I normally think remakes are cash-ins or redundant, but there are exceptions to that rule. John Carpenter's The Thing, Invasion of the Body Snatchers as well is another great example. And I think the Dawn of the Dead remake is really, really effective. There are some problems I have with it, but I'll get to that in a minute. And it's not particularly with the film itself; it's with how it was marketed more than anything else. It's directed by Zack Snyder. It's got people like Ving Rhames, who's famous, you know, in Pulp Fiction and films like that. Sarah Polley, Jake Weber, and it's, if you've seen the original film was made by George Romero, the original Dawn of the Dead, and it's an iconic horror film, so the idea of remaking that probably gave a lot of people horror. And the fact that it was made by Zack Snyder, who's a director who I've only seen 2 of his films. I've seen 300 and this, and but for some reason I've still got this feeling of caution about him. I haven't seen Sucker Punch. I've heard it's a bit of a mess, so I haven't seen Watchmen either. I loved the graphic novel, so I'm a little bit wary of Watchmen in terms of that. And also he's currently directing Man of Steel, the upcoming new Superman franchise. And even though it's Christopher Nolan's involved with it, I'm nervous about it, you know, because I love that character, I love that world, and I just hope it really works out for the best. However, back to Dawn of the Dead. It's a bit strange that I have issues with Zack Snyder, because the fact is that 300 I think is a good film. I don't think it's as amazing as people make out. I think it's more that it's visually unique, and that's why it sticks out in people's minds. But it's still a decent film, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And Dawn of the Dead, this remake, I think is actually really great. The original film, made by George Romero, have I already said that? I think I have, but I'm going to say it again, was a follow-up to his Night of the Living Dead, which is about a sort of zombie plague which takes over parts of America. And in the Dawn of the Dead original, it was really about a group of people who end up walled up in a mall, with all of the different shops and all the different products that are at hand, and they at the same time, you know, they're cut off from the world, they're besieged by zombies, but they're also, you know, it's a little bit of a fantasy, I think, for most consumers, of being in this place with all of these all of these items and products that you might want to buy. And people always talk about how Dawn of the Dead is a stinging critique of consumerism. One of my friends continually says that for a joke at every turn. Anyway, but the remake of Dawn of the Dead starts off, it follows a nurse who finishes her shift. She comes back home, everything's fine. She climbs into bed with her, I think it's her husband or her fiance, and they wake up to a girl from next door standing in her house, and they wonder what's wrong with her, and she's like covered in blood, and they think, you know, something terrible's happened. And before they know it, this girl goes on a zombie rampage, and the nurse is then running for her very life. She's running through the neighbourhood, and we're seeing this place just getting torn apart by a zombie plague that's just all of a sudden hit out of nowhere. And so the film progresses as this nurse meets up with a few other characters, a policeman played by Ving Rhames, and then they end up finding this mall, this shopping mall. They go in there, and there are a bunch of other people who do likewise, and the film is sort of plays out again, like, you know, what do you do in that situation? Do we stay here? At some point we should probably try and find somewhere safer, or do we just stay here because we've got all of these supplies and things like that? But at some point they will run out, and that's kind of the idea of it, and it's an exploration as well about between the dynamic. There's a great dynamic within the group, which is that there are security guards there who have become almost criminalistic, and they decide to hold everybody at gunpoint. And there's an interesting story there as well. Different divisions amongst the survivors that are in the mall. Here's my problem with it, and I'll get to some of the good stuff as well. My problem with it is that it shouldn't have been called Dawn of the Dead. That's my issue. There's really no reason for this film to have been called Dawn of the Dead. I don't think anyone would have had a problem if this film had just been called something else, not connected to the George Romero film. Yes, it's zombies, it has a mall, but it's a completely different film. It doesn't follow the story at all of the original, other than the zombies and the mall and or shopping centre, as we would say here, but mall always sounds better. And it certainly it's really a remake in name only, in my opinion. I think a lot of fans of the zombie genre would have been delighted with the fact that there was a zombie film set largely in a mall again, and even if it wasn't called Dawn of the Dead, they would be fine with that. It'd be a nice homage to one of the greatest zombie films ever made. That's my biggest criticism. So that's not really a criticism of the film, it's really how they marketed it. They called it Dawn of the Dead, and they marketed it as a remake of the original, and it just doesn't really feel like that. I know you could say that that John Carpenter's The Thing doesn't really feel like a remake, but it's a kind of pseudo sequel / remake / readaptation of the source material, which was a book. But with Dawn of the Dead, you're remaking a film, and I think this film stands on its own, in my opinion. I actually did a video a while ago with my friend Alan. We do a series called Double Feature over on area50bun.com. I'll link to it down below, where he's an anime fan and I'm a horror fan, and each episode I give him a horror film to watch and review, and he gives me an anime film to watch and review. And because I'm not really that familiar with anime, and Alan's maybe not as familiar with horror, but one thing he is familiar with is the Romero films. He is very familiar with them, and we did a video where we did sort of like the Dawn of the Dead remake versus the Dawn of the Dead original. I mean, I think we both came to the conclusion that both are good. You know, we like both of them. There's some great action scenes in the remake. I think when the people in the mall decide to, spoilers I suppose, but decide to try to move around or go to different places, there's some great action scenes with that. A lot of blood and guts and gore, things that you would expect in the zombie genre. And there's actually a nice little bit of humour as well, a bit of comedy. There's also a nice little bit of pathos as well, when you have people getting infected and dealing with that. My favourite relationship in the entire film is between the Ving Rhames character, who often goes up to the roof, and all the zombies are down below in the car park, so there's really no way out. But across from that is a gun and ammunition shop, and the owner of that shop is on his roof, and they never really get to speak properly, but they communicate with each other. You know, they draw things and talk to one another that way, and I think it's a really great. I actually think that relationship is the heart of the film, because the zombie genre is really, when you think about it, normally, not always, but normally is a subgenre of the apocalyptic, apocalyptic tales about the end of the world. And really, tales about the end of the world normally surround the breakdown of civilization, the breakdown of communication, and the breakdown of people being interconnected with one another. There's a loneliness, and that's something that's normally explored in these films. If you look at any apocalyptic film, you'll normally find that. And I think that having the two characters on two roofs of two buildings, it would take you a minute to walk from one to the other. To have them divided by the zombies, which represent the end of humanity, and not being able to communicate with one another, is I think it's a great summation of a lot of the things that go on in apocalyptic films. So there's a lot of things to like in this movie. when I first watched it, I actually went to the cinema to see it. I thought, there's no way I'm going to like this. I went in prejudiced because I value the George Romero films so much, and I was really pleasantly surprised. I don't really have many criticisms of it. Is it as good as the George Romero film? Again, it's not really fair to compare. I mean, the George Romero film is iconic because it helped define an entire genre. So even if films come after that, which may be better, like for example, some people disagree, but I think 28 Days Later is probably about the best zombie film that I've seen. And I know people will say it's an infected film, but to me it's part of the zombie genre. You still have to appreciate the films which defined the genre, got the ball rolling. So Dawn of the Dead, the remake, is very much living off of past films, and also it borrows heavily from 28 Days Later as well. Romero zombies are slow, stupid, quite sort of almost passive aggressive in the way that they are, and that was part of the satire of Dawn of the Dead. You had these zombies wandering around the mall, you know, just sort of like consumers supposedly do. I think that was the point that Romero was trying to make. But after 28 Days Later, we had these zombies that would just run and go for you and be aggressive, and it was an absolute revelation in terms of that genre. And I think that the Dawn of the Dead remake, obviously, it takes some ideas from Romero, but it actually has got more to do with 28 Days Later and films like that. I mean, you probably could have simply tweaked a couple of things in the story of the Dawn of the Dead remake, and it would have made more sense as a sequel to 28 Days Later about what's happening in America when the infection gets there than it does being a remake of the original Dawn of the Dead. One of the things that I really appreciated in this film is that Zack Snyder used the credits to tell a story, and I think that's a really interesting concept, like an epilogue. You know, the main story's been told, but there's this little bit that you want to get in there, and it does kind of affect the conclusion of the film, but you can't really tell exactly what's going on. But it basically shows you footage of different things happening to the characters while the credits are playing after the end of the film, and I think that was really, really interesting. So I'm surprised how much I've talked about this film because it was a last minute review and I haven't really taken any notice about it or anything like that, so if I get any things wrong I do apologise. But a great suggestion, a really interesting film. I think fun is probably the best way to describe the Dawn of the Dead remake. It's just fun. Yes, it borrows heavily from 28 Days Later. Yes, it's standing on the shoulders of Romero and others who came before it, but it's still a really effective zombie film. It's got laughs and it's got a bit of pathos in there, and it's got some great action scenes, great blood and guts if that's what you're into. That's not really my cup of tea, but it is there for the gore fans out there, and yeah, highly recommended. So that's us finished with the 20th horror of let me start that again. The 20th entry in the 31 Horrors of Mike. There's still time. If you've got other suggestions, get them in, because like what happened last night, I took that suggestion and went, do you know what? Great suggestion. I'm going to get it in. I'm going to review it. So if you've got any other ideas, let me know. As always, Facebook page down below, Tumblr down below. Check it out if you're interested in other things that I do, and I will speak to you all soon. Bye for now.